The first blow landed sometime after midnight. Neighbors later said they heard nothing that night, only the cicadas singing beyond the open windows of Maple Hollow. Inside the small farmhouse on Hensley Road, a single bulb burned above the kitchen table. A cup of coffee sat cooling beside a stack of unpaid bills. By sunrise, Walter Dean Hensley, 42, veteran, husband, father, was gone. His pickup remained in the driveway, keys still hanging on the hook by the door. Only the silence felt different, stretched thin, like the house itself was holding its breath. When Mary Hensley awoke, she thought Walter had gone early to the feed store. He'd been restless all week, talking about overdue accounts and a disagreement with his younger brother, Samuel. She fried eggs, poured 2 cups of coffee, and waited. By 8, the coffee had gone cold. The sheriff arrived by noon, called by Mary's trembling voice. He wouldn't just leave, she said. Sheriff Clyde Rooker looked around the kitchen, noting the untouched breakfast, the worn Bible open on the counter. Men get tired sometimes, he offered, but he'd seen the look in her eyes fear, not confusion. The search began that same afternoon. Dozens of volunteers combed the woods behind the Hensley property, wading through the late summer heat. They found footprints near the creek, but lost the trail among the sycamores. Walter's dog, Boone, refused to leave the porch, whining toward the field as if listening for his master's whistle. By nightfall, Sheriff Rooker had to admit there were no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no tracks leading away. Maybe he left on his own, a deputy whispered. But everyone in Maple Hollow knew Walter wasn't that kind of man. He was the kind who stayed. 2 days later, the local paper printed his photograph. Missing Walter Dean Hensley, age 42. Last seen August 19th, 1968. Beneath the headline, the photo showed him in his Sunday shirt, mustache neat, eyes squinting against the sun. He looked solid, dependable. The kind of man you'd borrow tools from and return late without him minding. People at the diner shook their heads. Some blamed money trouble. Others whispered about a woman in Chattanooga. But Mary sat alone in church that Sunday, her hands folded tight, her wedding ring leaving a pale band where the sun no longer touched. Deputies dredged the nearby pond. Nothing. Bloodhounds brought from Nashville lost his scent near the property line. Sheriff Rooker questioned Samuel Hensley, the brother Walter had argued with. "It was about land," Samuel admitted, "but we made peace." His eyes didn't waver. Still, something in his voice made Rooker uneasy. Samuel was known for his temper, especially after a few drinks. But with no body, no weapon, no motive anyone could prove, the sheriff's hands were tied. By September, the flyers had curled in the heat, and the town moved on except Mary, who left a porch light burning every night. Autumn came to Maple Hollow with slow mercy. The tobacco fields turned gold, the air heavy with wood smoke. Mary stopped attending church. Some said grief made her bitter. Others thought guilt had rooted in her heart. Rumors grew like weeds. Walter had run off. Walter had debts. Walter had secrets. But the house remained hers. She lived there quietly, closing the curtains early, speaking little. In the rare moments she appeared in town, her eyes were ringed dark with sleeplessness. When asked if there was any word, she always gave the same reply. "He's close. I can feel it." Years passed. The Hensley place aged like unpainted wood, slowly, unevenly. The porch sagged. Weeds swallowed the steps. Mary died in 1981, alone, her obituary listing no surviving family. The house sold twice in the decades that followed, each time to people who stayed only a few years. They spoke of strange noises at night, of boards creaking where no one walked. One owner swore he smelled pipe smoke drifting from beneath the floorboards. "The house is settling," the inspector told him. But when the new buyers moved in 2019, the house would finally reveal what it had been hiding. Long before that, In 1968, the case file gathered dust. The sheriff retired. The deputies scattered. The missing poster hung for years on the station corkboard until the edges yellowed and curled inward. In the drawer beneath it lay Walter's pocket knife, found near the barn, engraved with his initials W.D.H., and a drop of rust that might have been blood, though no test ever proved it. "Some mysteries just stay that way," Rooker muttered to his successor before handing over the keys. Maple Hollow liked its peace. Silence, after all, was easier than questions. But silence has a way of keeping secrets alive. In 1974, a group of kids exploring the old Hensley place claimed to hear tapping under the floor in the back room. The story spread through the high school like wildfire. One boy even swore he saw a shape, a handprint on the dusty boards. Sheriff's deputies checked and found nothing, though one later admitted the air felt wrong in that room, colder somehow. After that, parents warned their kids to stay away from the Hensley farm. By winter, the legend had taken root. The ghost of Walter Hensley never left home. It wasn't just folklore. People close to Walter remembered things that didn't fit neatly into rumor. A week before his disappearance, he withdrew a large sum from the local bank cash that was never found. He'd also written to a cousin in Kentucky, saying he had something important to confess. The letter arrived 2 days too late. Investigators never learned what it contained. His brother Samuel inherited the neighboring land, but sold it shortly after, moving to Arkansas. When interviewed years later, he said only, "I don't like to think about that summer." Then he hung up. Detective Morgan Walsh of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation discovered the file by accident in 2019. She was reviewing cold cases for a new DNA initiative when she saw the name Hensley, Walter Dean. The details caught her attention. Missing man. Small town. No trace for 50 years. "Old cases talk if you listen long enough," she said. The file smelled of dust and time. Inside, black and white photos, handwritten notes, and a single envelope labeled, "Personal do not discard." Walsh didn't know it yet, but that envelope would lead her straight to Maple Hollow. The envelope contained 3 photographs, one of the farmhouse in 1968, one of Walter with his wife, and one curious close-up wooden floorboards, splintered slightly near a corner seam. A note on the back read, "He's still here." No signature. Walsh frowned. She ran the images through the archives, no record of them, possibly left by an anonymous source. She checked property records and found that the same house still stood, now owned by the Bennett family, who had purchased it earlier that year. 50 years later, and the house hasn't changed much, she murmured. Something about that felt deliberate. Walsh drove down to Maple Hollow in late September. The road wound through low hills and cornfields, past mailboxes leaning from decades of weather. The Hensley property sat at the end of a gravel lane, framed by pecan trees. The house looked weary, but alive, peeling paint, cracked porch, but smoke rising from the chimney. When she knocked, a woman in her 40s answered, cautious but polite. "Detective Morgan Walsh, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation," she said, showing her badge. "We're revisiting a disappearance connected to this address." The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and age. The Bennetts had begun minor renovations, pulling up old carpet in the back room. "My husband said the floor was uneven," the woman explained. "He started tearing it up yesterday." Walsh followed her down the hallway. Afternoon light spilled through lace curtains, painting pale stripes across the floor. In the back room, planks lay pried open, revealing dark soil beneath. Walsh crouched, running her hand along the splintered edges. Her flashlight caught something metallic glinting below a belt buckle, half buried in dust. Stamped letters read, "W.D.H." The Bennetts watched from the doorway as Walsh radioed for forensic support. "Probably just a lost buckle," the husband offered. But when the team arrived and began clearing soil, the outline of something unmistakable began to emerge. A human form, curled tight, trapped beneath the floorboards. The coroner's quiet voice broke the stillness. "We've got remains." Walsh stood motionless, feeling the weight of decades pressing in. The air seemed to hum. Outside, wind rustled through dry corn like whispered names. After 51 years, Walter Dean Hensley had finally come home. News spread fast. Human remains found beneath Maple Hollow home believed to be missing man from 1968. Reporters descended on the small town, their cameras gleaming under gray autumn skies. Locals gathered near the sheriff's office, swapping theories like old gossip. "Mary must have known," someone whispered. "Maybe she killed him herself." Others insisted it was Samuel, back for revenge. Sheriff Dale Thompson, barely born when the case began, held a press conference. "We can confirm the remains are male," he said. "Further testing will determine identity." But everyone already knew whose ghost they'd unearthed. Walsh stood in the farmhouse doorway, watching technicians photograph every inch of the floor. A fragment of cloth clung to the wood, a plaid shirt faded to near gray. "He was wearing that in the photo," she murmured. The coroner nodded. "Looks like trauma to the skull. No exit wound, blunt force, maybe hammer or rifle butt." The words landed heavy. Walsh looked toward the empty kitchen, where a single light bulb still hung from the ceiling. She could almost see it as it was that night. Coffee cup cooling, bills scattered, silence swallowing the house whole. Back in her motel room, Walsh spread the old file across the bed. The photos, the notes, the missing poster. Beneath it all lay the same unanswered question. Who buried him there? And how had no one noticed? The autopsy confirmed male, age 40-45, consistent with Walter's records. DNA results were pending, but the belt buckle made it clear. What puzzled her was the position his arms crossed over his chest, like someone had placed him gently, not discarded him. "Whoever did this," she said aloud, "knew him well." The line between love and guilt blurred thin as dust. The next morning, she visited the county archives. Old property transfers, death certificates, land disputes, all the paper trails of small-town life. She found Mary's will, dated 1980. Most of the estate went to charity, but one clause stood out. The house is not to be disturbed. The floor must remain as built. Walsh exhaled slowly. She knew. That night, sitting in her car outside the farmhouse, she watched the lights flicker in the windows and wondered what secret a wife could keep for 50 years, and whether protecting the dead was ever the same as loving them. The lab results arrived 2 days later. DNA confirmed Walter Dean Hensley. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull, circa late August 1968. Walsh stared at the report, then at the final note in Sheriff Rooker's handwriting. Case suspended, pending discovery. The discovery had come, but justice still waited. Somewhere between the pages of rumor and truth lay the story of a family broken, a town that chose silence, and a man whose voice had finally returned from beneath the floorboards. The real question was, who put him there, and why? Forensic teams stayed on site for days, working through the layers of dust and memory. The air in the old house felt heavy, every creak echoing like a confession. By the end of the week, the evidence table filled with relics of Walter's final night: his belt buckle, fragments of flannel, 2 coffee mugs, and a dented flashlight wrapped in brittle newspaper. Detective Morgan Walsh studied it all in silence. "If this house could talk," a technician said softly. Walsh replied without looking up, "It just did." We just have to learn how to listen. The DNA match gave them a body, but not a killer. The file's missing pages, reports, interviews, photos told Walsh someone had tried to erase more than time. She requested surviving relatives for comparison samples. Only one name came up: Samuel Hensley, now 82, living in Little Rock. She called the Arkansas State Police for assistance. "He's frail," the officer warned. "Doubt he'll talk." Walsh smiled thinly. They all talk when the past knocks on the door. That afternoon, she drove 6 hours west, the Tennessee hills giving way to flat, endless farmland that swallowed the horizon. Samuel Hensley lived in a modest brick home at the edge of town, oxygen tank beside his recliner, television murmuring an old western. When Walsh introduced herself, he didn't look surprised. "Took you long enough," he rasped. She placed a photo of the farmhouse on the table. "We found your brother." His gaze lingered on it. "Unreadable. Should have left him where he was," he said finally. The statement was strange, half confession, half warning. Walsh leaned forward. "Tell me what happened that night." Samuel exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the muted TV. It wasn't supposed to go that far. His story came in fragments. A family argument over money, land boundaries, pride. Walter accused Samuel of stealing tools and lying about a shared inheritance. Tempers flared. "He came at me first," Samuel said, voice trembling. "We scuffled, and I swung that flashlight. Didn't even realize he'd stopped breathing until I saw the blood." Silence filled the room. Walsh waited. "You didn't call the sheriff?" Samuel shook his head. Mary was crying. Said no one would believe it was an accident. She begged me to help her bury him. She said the floor would keep him close. Walsh felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You buried your own brother under his house?" Samuel's eyes watered, not from tears but age. "She said it was God's punishment. Said if we told anyone, the Lord would take the rest of us too." His hands shook as he reached for his oxygen tube. "I couldn't live there anymore. I left the next week." Mary stayed. She said she'd guard him. Walsh closed her notebook slowly. "She guarded him for 50 years, she murmured. Outside, the wind rattled the dry leaves like restless bones. Back in Tennessee, Walsh typed her report through the night. Involuntary manslaughter, assisted concealment, deceased co-conspirator. The legal language felt hollow beside the human weight of it all. There would be no trial. Samuel's doctor confirmed he was dying. Still, the record would be corrected. Walter's name would finally move from missing to found. Around midnight, Walsh stepped outside the motel. Crickets hummed in the dark. She thought of Mary, sealing the floor above her husband, living decades with that silence beneath her feet. "Some prisons don't need bars," she whispered. 2 weeks later, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released the findings publicly. The press descended again. Brother confesses to 1,968 killing after body found under floorboards. The town of Maple Hollow reacted with uneasy relief. Some felt vindicated. Others looked away, unwilling to accept that the ghost story had always been flesh and blood. Sheriff Thompson held another briefing. "Closure isn't the same as peace," he said, voice steady. "But at least now the truth's been dug up." Behind him, a photo of Walter Dean Hensley was pinned to the wall, smiling faintly from another lifetime. Walsh returned to the farmhouse one last time. The Bennetts had moved out, unable to sleep after the discovery. The rooms were empty now, stripped to wood and shadow. She stood in the doorway of the back room, the floorboard still missing, exposing the dark cavity beneath. Morning light filtered through broken blinds, illuminating motes of dust that swirled like spirits in the air. She crouched, touching the soil. "We found you," she said softly. Somewhere outside, a crow called once, sharp and lonely, as if echoing his name through the hollow. The evidence was archived, the report finalized, Yet Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unfinished. She reread the note found in the old file. "He's still here." The handwriting didn't match any of the original investigators. It was recent, likely written within the last decade. Who had placed it there? Perhaps Mary, before she died, or someone who'd heard the whispers and believed them. Either way, the note had led her straight to the truth. Sometimes, she thought, the dead send messages in the only ways they can. At the state lab, DNA analysts compared samples from the buckle, shirt fibers, and the flashlight handle. A faint, partial print surfaced female. Too degraded for identification, but confirmation nonetheless that Mary had touched the murder weapon. Walsh stared at the report, feeling a strange tenderness toward the woman she'd never met. Love, guilt, and fear had merged into a single lifetime of silence. She wasn't hiding him from justice, Walsh said to the lab tech. She was hiding him from forgetting. The tech didn't reply, only nodded. Some stories explain themselves without words. That winter, Maple Hollow held a memorial at the small Baptist church, the pews filled with locals, their faces older, softer, curious. On the altar stood a framed photo of Walter, restored, cleaned, his eyes bright again. The pastor spoke gently about truth and redemption. When Walsh was invited to say a few words, she hesitated. "Justice," she said finally, "isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about remembering what we chose to bury." Outside, the cold air smelled of pine and smoke. As the congregation dispersed, someone whispered, "He's finally home." A month later, Walsh received a small package with no return address. Inside was an old cassette tape labeled August 20th, 1968. She found an office player, pressed play. Static hissed. Then, a woman's trembling voice. "Walter, if anyone ever finds this, I'm sorry. I can't undo what happened. I only wanted to keep us together." Then silence. Walsh sat motionless. The tape crackled once more, a faint thud, footsteps, and the creak of floorboards closing. The recording ended. She rewound it twice before filing it into evidence, though she already knew whose voice it was. The recording never made the news. Some truths, Walsh decided, were meant for quieter places. She filed her final report in February 2020, right before the world changed again with its own chaos. The case was officially closed. Yet whenever she thought of Maple Hollow, she pictured that farmhouse, the way sunlight bent through the dusty windows, the hollow sound of old wood remembering footsteps long gone. "Every house keeps a story," she once told a rookie detective. "You just have to listen to the floor." Samuel Hensley died a few months later in his sleep. His confession remained sealed in court archives, marked posthumous. At his request, his ashes were sent back to Tennessee, scattered quietly near the creek behind the Hensley property. No ceremony, no headline, only the slow murmur of water over stones. Sheriff Thompson attended alone. "Guess you're both home now," he murmured. The breeze caught his words and carried them toward the fields where the cicadas sang the same song they had half a century before. The farmhouse stood empty through the next winter, its roof sagging, vines creeping through the porch rails. Locals said you could still hear footsteps inside on quiet nights. A realtor from Nashville listed it as historic property restoration potential. No one bought it. Too many stories, too much silence. Eventually, the county declared it unsafe and scheduled demolition. When the machines arrived that spring, the first wall collapsed easily, as if the house itself was finally ready to let go. Among the debris, a worker found something small and shining, a gold wedding ring, initials engraved inside, WDH to MH, 1947. He turned it over in his hand, pocketed it quietly, and later delivered it to the sheriff's office. Thompson placed it in an evidence box labeled returned to family, no survivors. For a long moment, he stared at it under the harsh office light. The ring caught the glow and threw it back faintly, like a last flicker of something once whole. Walsh visited Maple Hollow one final time before transferring to another division. The field where the house once stood was now leveled, dotted with wildflowers. She parked at the edge, rolled down the window, and listened. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of rain and dust. For a moment, she thought she heard faint music, a man humming an old tune, the kind sung on porches at dusk. She smiled, unsure if it was real or just memory. "Rest easy, Walter," she whispered, then drove away. In the Bureau's cold case archive, the Hensley file rests on a new shelf, sealed and catalogued. The cover bears a final note in Walsh's handwriting. "Case closed, justice served through truth." No one will likely open it again, but the story lives in the quiet corners of those who remember. Every investigator leaves a piece of themselves behind in the cases that change them. For Walsh, it was a single floorboard, pried open to reveal not just a crime, but the endurance of love twisted by fear. Years later, a documentary team visited Maple Hollow to film a segment on small-town cold cases solved by DNA. They interviewed Thompson, now retired, who still kept Walter's photo in his office. "It wasn't science that solved it," he told the camera. "It was persistence and a woman's guilt strong enough to keep a secret for half a century." The camera panned to the empty lot, wildflowers swaying where the house once stood. "What did you feel when you found the body?" the reporter asked. Thompson paused. "Peace," he said simply. As dusk settled over the Tennessee hills, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the field that once held the Hensley home. Crickets began their slow chorus, the same sound that filled the night Walter disappeared. The ground was quiet now, no more secrets beneath it, only the soft rhythm of the earth remembering. The truth had taken half a century to surface, but it had come, patient and unstoppable, like time itself. And in that quiet southern town, for the first time in 51 years, the floorboards finally rested.